Mark Twain's journal. We of the personal staff were in fairyland now. During the few days that we waited for the return of the army, we went into society. To our two knights, this was not a novelty, but to us young villagers, it was a new and wonderful life. Any position of any sort near the person of the maid of Vaucouleurs conferred high distinction upon the holder and caused his society to be courted. And so the Diac brothers, Joan d'Arc, uh, and Noel, and the paladin, humble peasants at home, were gentlemen here, personages of weight and influences. It was fine to see how soon their country diffidences and awkwardness melted away under the pleasant sun of deference and disappeared, and how lightly and easily they took to their new atmosphere. The paladin was as happy as it was possible for any one in the earth to be. His tongue went all the time, and daily he got new delights out of the hearing himself talk. He began to enlarge his ancestry and spread it all around and ennoble it to the right and left, and it was not long until it consisted almost entirely of dates. He worked up his old battle and tricked them out with fresh splendors. Also with new terrors, for he added artillery now. We had seen cannon for the first time at Blois, a few pieces. Here there was plenty of it. We had the impressive spectacle of a huge English Bastille hidden from sight in a mountain of smoke from its guns, with lattices of red flame darting through it, and this grand picture, along with the quaking thunders fondling away in the heart of it, inflamed the paladin's imagination and enabled him to dress out those ambuscade skirmishes of ours with a subtlety which made it possible for any to recognize them at all except people who had not been there. You may suspect that there was a special inspiration for these great efforts of the paladin, and there was. It was the daughter of the house, Catherine Boucher, who was 18 and gentle and lovely in her ways, and very beautiful. I think she might have been as beautiful as Joan herself if she had had Joan's eyes. That could never be. There were never but that one pair, and there will never be another. Joan's eyes were deep and rich and wonderful beyond anything merely earthly. They spoke all the languages, they had no need of words. They produced all the effects, and just by a glance, just a glance that could convict a liar of his lie and make him confess it, that could bring down a proud man's pride and make him humble, that could put courage into a coward and strike dead the courage of the bravest, that could appease resentments and real hatreds, that could speak peace to storms of passion and be obeyed, that could make the doubter believe and the hopeless hope again, that could purify the impure mind, that could persuade. Ah, there it is, persuasion. That is the word. What or who it had, what or who is it that it couldn't persuade? The maniac of Domremy, the fairy banishing priest, the reverend tribunal of Toul, the doubting and superstitious Laxart, the obstinate veteran of Vaucouleurs, the characterless heir of France, the sages and scholars of Parliament and University of Poitiers, the darling of Satan La Hire, the masterless bastard of Orleans, accustomed to acknowledge no way as right, and but rational but his own. These were the trophies of that great gift that made her the wonder and mystery that she was. We mingled companionably with the great folk who flocked to the big house to make Joan's acquaintance, and they made much of us, and we lived in the clouds, so to speak. But what we preferred even to this happiness was the quieter occasion when the formal guests were gone and the family and a few dozen of us familiar faces were gathered together for a social good time. It was then that we did our best, we five youngsters, with such fascination as we had, and the chief object of them was Catherine. None of us had ever been in love before, and now we had the misfortune to all fall in love with the same person at the same time. She was a merry heart and full of life, and I still remember tenderly those few evenings that I was permitted to have my share of her dear society and of her comradeship with that little company of charming people. The paladin made us all jealous that first night, for when we got fairly started on those battles of his, he had everything to himself, and there was no use to anybody else trying to get any attention. Those people had been living in the midst of real war for 7 months, and to hear this windy giant lay on his imaginary campaigns and fairly swim in blood and splatter all around, entertain him to the verge of the grave. Catherine was like to die for pure enjoyment. She didn't laugh loud, we of course wished she would, but kept in the shelter of a fan and shook until there was a danger that she would unhitch her ribs from her spine. Then when the paladin got done with the battle and we began to feel thankful and hoped for a change, she would speak up in a way that was so sweet and persuasive that it rankled in me, and asked if he had seen his father in the early part of his battle, which she had great interest in, and would he be so good as to describe that part again and with a little more particularity? Which of course precipitated the whole battle over us again, with 100 lives added that had been overlooked before. I do not know how to make you realize that pain I suffered. I had never been jealous before, and it seemed intolerable that this creature should have had this good fortune, which he was so ill entitled to, and I have to sit and see myself neglected when I was so longing for the least little attention out of the thousand that this beloved girl was lavishing upon him. I was near her, and tried 2 or 3 times to get started on some of the things that I had done in those battles, and I felt ashamed of myself too, for stooping to such a business. But she cared for nothing but his battles, and and could not he got to listen. Presently, one of my attempts caused her to lose some precious rag or other of her mendicities, and she asked him to repeat it, putting on a new engagement, of course, and increasing the havoc and carnage tenfold. I felt so humiliated by this pitiful miscarriage of mine that I gave up and tried no more. The others were as outraged by the paladin's selfish conduct as I was, and by his grand luck too, of course. Perhaps indeed that was the main hurt. We talked our trouble over together, which was but natural, for rivals become brothers when a common affliction assails them and a common enemy beats off the victory. Each of us could do things that would please and get notice if it were not for this person, who occupied all the time and gave others no chance. I had made a poem, taking a whole night to it, a poem in which I most happily and delicately celebrated that sweet girl's charm without mentioning her name, but any one could see who it was meant for. For the bare title, The Rose of Orleans, would reveal that, as it seemed to me. It pictured this pure and dainty white rose as growing up out of the rude soil of war and looking abroad out of her tender eyes upon the hard machinery of death. And then, note this conceit, it blushes for the sinful nature of man and turns red in a single night. Becomes a red rose, you see, a rose that was white before. The idea was my own and quite new. Then its sweet perfume out over the embattled city, and when the beleaguering forces smelt it, they laid down their arms and wept. This was also my own idea, and new. That closed that part of the poem. Then I put her into the similitude of the firmament, not the whole of it, but only part. That is to say, she was the moon, and all the constellations were following her about, their hearts inflamed for love of her. But she would not halt, she would not listen, which was thought she loved another. 'Twas thought she loved a poor unworthy suppliant who was upon the earth, facing danger, death, and possible mutilation in the bloody field, waging relentless war against a heartless foe to save her from all too early a grave and her city from destruction. And when the sad pursuing constellations came to know and realize the bitter sorrow that was come upon them, note this idea, their hearts broke and their tears gathered forth, filling the vault of heaven with a fiery splendor. Those tears were falling stars. It was a rash idea, but beautiful, beautiful and pathetic, wonderful pathetic. The way I had it, with the rhyme and all of it, to help. And the end of each where there were 2 line refrains pitying the poor earthly lover separated too far, so far, and perhaps forever, from her he loved so well, and growing always pale and weaker and thinner in the agony as he neared the cruel grave. The most touching thing, even the boys themselves could hardly keep back their tears, the way Noel said those lines. There were 8 4-line stanzas in the first end of the poem. The end about the rose, the horticultural end, as you may say, if that is not too large a name for such a little poem, and 8 in the astronomical end, 16 stanzas altogether. and I could have made it 150 if I had wanted to. I was so inspired and so all swelled up with beautiful thoughts and fancies. But that would have been too many to sing or recite before a company that way, whereas 16 was just right and could be done over again if desired.